The Secret of Blood Hill. Once upon a time, in the small town where I grew up, there was a place called Blood Hill by the locals. It wasn't famous like places you can find on Google. Actually, it didn't seem to have a real name at all. That's how quiet and unknown it was. I haven't been back to that sleepy little town in West Virginia for 20 years, and after a chat with my old friend Will, I don't think I'll ever go back. My hometown was mostly surrounded by fields and woods. It was really rural, but we still had what we needed: a sawmill where people had been working for ages, a post office, a small bank, and a church. It was a cozy place where everyone knew each other's business, whether it was good or bad. At one time, I thought I'd go back and live there. But after you hear my story, you'll understand why I changed my mind. It was autumn, and I was 11 years old. When we weren't at school, doing homework, or helping at home, my friend Will and I spent all our time in the woods. We played, built forts, and explored for miles and miles. I'm surprised our parents let us go so far from home. But there was one rule that every kid in our town knew very well: never, ever go to Blood Hill. According to the grown-ups, the place called Blood Hill was spooky. They said it was haunted by the ghosts of criminals who got executed there a long time ago, like 150 to 200 years back. At night, they said you could hear the ghosts crying in pain if you got close enough. Some folks even said they saw pale, ghostly figures moving around there. But that wasn't the scariest part. There was this terrible creature called the ogre who supposedly lived under the hill in a secret cave. Legend said it would drink the blood of anyone who died nearby, especially kids who wandered too close. Even though the hill didn't have its old purpose anymore, the ogre still hung around, looking for its next meal. When I was young, I wasn't sure if I believed all those stories, but I was too scared to go against my parents' wishes. My friend Will, though, wasn't so easily scared. He liked to test the limits, but he wasn't a bad kid, just adventurous. I kind of ended up tagging along with him a lot, much to my parents' annoyance. One day, we were walking down a dirt road, surrounded by autumn trees. The wind was chilly, but not too harsh. Leaves were rustling under our feet as we walked. Will, swinging a stick around like he was fighting invisible monsters, suddenly brought up Blood Hill. "So, Luke," he said, "about Blood Hill." I let out a sigh and kicked some rocks on the ground. "Yeah," I said, wondering what my friend was up to now. He grinned at me, and I knew right away what that meant. He wanted to go exploring again. "Have you ever thought about what's up there?" he asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "No, not really. And besides, we already know," I started to say, but Will interrupted me. He pointed his stick at me and laughed. "Oh, come on, Connor. You're almost 12, and you still believe in ghosts and monsters?" He was right. I was still kind of scared sometimes. But I knew he wasn't trying to make fun of me, he just wanted me to be brave like him. Still, I had to say something to keep my dignity. "No, I don't, but don't you think that Dash?" "Seriously?" Will cut me off. "Have you ever seen a ghost?" "No," I admitted quietly. "What about monsters then?" Will asked, teasing me. Okay. I get it. None of them really exist, Happy," I replied, feeling a bit embarrassed. A smug grin spread across his face. He glanced into the woods, then back at me, like he was daring me to go first. But I stayed put. Finally, Will spoke up. "I actually know how to get there." "So, what do you say?" he asked. "What? You want to go there right now?" I exclaimed. "Yeah, you got a problem with that?" Will said, that mischievous smile still on his face. His words made me nervous as I looked at the trees. Suddenly, the forest seemed ancient and full of scary things I couldn't see. I took a deep breath, looked down at my feet, and cleared my throat. "Okay," I said, turning back to Will. "But do we really have to do it right now? If my parents find out, they're gonna ground me." Luckily, Will seemed to come to his senses, but I could tell he still wanted to go. When I got to his house and started unpacking, I realized my parents were going away for the weekend, and I was staying with Will's family. It would be fun hanging out with my best friend, but I knew the topic of Blood Hill would come up again. After dinner, as I was unpacking in his room, he said the magic words, "Let's check out Blood Hill after dinner, okay?" The moment I stepped into Will's room, I knew I was in trouble. My parents had already left, and I couldn't just walk out. Basically, I had to agree to another one of Will's crazy adventures. After dinner, we grabbed our bags and packed some snacks and flashlights. Then, we headed into the woods. I felt nervous as we walked over dead leaves and tangled roots. The bird sounds were fading away as they flew south for the winter. Eventually, we found an old hunting tower. We checked it out but didn't find anything interesting, so we kept going. We ended up at a wet, smelly bog. The sky was gray, and in the dim light, the old trees looked like piles of bones. After walking for another 40 minutes, we stopped to rest and eat snacks. While munching on a granola bar, I asked Will how he knew the way to Blood Hill. "You might think, it's just a hill, how hard can it be to find?" But let me tell you, those woods were big and scary in some parts. So, finding a hill or anything high up was like finding a needle in a haystack. Will took a sip from his Gatorade and then told me that some kids had already broken the rule and gone to the mythical hill. After putting his bottle back, he stood up and reached out his hand to me. When I grabbed it, I knew something was up. He had that familiar mischievous smile on his face. I'd known Will long enough to know he was about to spill some secret plan. "I have a plan, Connor," he said. I sighed but chuckled a little. "Oh yeah? I heard no one has actually climbed the hill and seen what's on the other side," he said. I didn't like where this was going. First, I didn't want to go to Blood Hill, and second, I was scared of heights. But I stayed quiet and nodded along. I wasn't sure what scared me more, ghosts or ogres, or what my parents would do if they found out I went without their permission. Will looked at me, his smile fading a bit. He patted my shoulder to reassure me. He knew I was scared. "It's okay. I won't tell anyone you were with me, okay?" he said. I glanced in the direction we were headed. Maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be so bad. Maybe the hill, with all its scary stories, was just what I needed to face my fears. I looked at my friend and took a deep breath. "Okay. Show me the way." As we walked a bit further, I felt the atmosphere change. It was like Mother Nature was holding her breath. The birds, animals, even the wind, all seemed to quiet down. I looked up and saw dark clouds gathering, a sign of rain. "Looks like it's going to rain soon," I said, feeling a bit worried. "Maybe we should turn back?" Will, who was leading the way, stopped and turned to face me. I could tell he was not happy. "Huh, didn't know you were such a chicken, Connor," he said. I was about to say something back when I saw his eyes widen. Suddenly, he screamed, "Run!" And just like that, the sky opened up, raining down a mix of rain and hail. We ran as fast as we could until we found shelter under a big tree. We squeezed under its low branches and stayed there, quiet as mice. After what felt like forever, the storm calmed down, and we crawled out. The air smelled damp and earthy. The sky was clear now, deep blue with fluffy white clouds, and the sun was setting, turning the sky red. As soon as Will stood up, he started walking again. We kept trudging through the woods, but we didn't see any hill or high ground. Will? How much longer do we have to walk?" I asked. Instead of being snarky, Will pointed to a thick patch of pine trees. "There," he said. Before we reached the hill, we had to go over some big rocks covered in moss. On the other side, there was a huge tree that got knocked over by the wind. My imagination went wild. The dirt where the tree used to be looked like the mouth of a big monster. Rocks looked like little gnomes, and twisted trees seemed like mean old witches. We kept walking through the thick patch of pine trees, and as we did, the sun disappeared. I watched every step, wondering what scary thing I might see next. Would I really see a ghost? Or a phantom? Maybe even the scary ogre that ate kids? When I finally saw Blood Hill, I realized it was just a simple cliff, about 20 feet high. All the stories I'd heard about it scared me a lot, even gave me nightmares sometimes. But now, looking at it, I felt relieved. It was nothing special, just a regular cliff. Will stepped forward and touched the rocky surface. This is awesome," he said, excitement in his voice. Then he looked at me. "Isn't this the coolest thing ever?" "Sure," I said, trying not to sound sarcastic. "Well? Ready to start climbing?" Honestly, I'm surprised we even made it to the top without any gear. We took our time, being careful not to slip on the wet rocks. But our curiosity kept us going until we finally reached the top. What I saw was amazing. In the distance, I could see my hometown, but besides that, it was all wild, unexplored land. Blood Hill stuck out like a black thumb among the pine trees and colorful autumn leaves. Dusk was coming, and everything around us was glowing in the fading light. I must have zoned out because eventually, I looked away from the forest and saw Will standing at the edge of the cliff, looking down at something. I walked over to him, wondering how such a beautiful place could have such scary stories. When I looked down, I saw a different kind of forest below us. It looked ancient, like it hadn't been touched by humans. It was the kind of forest you only see in books. But before I could really take it in, Will asked me to help him find a way down. It didn't take long. When my feet touched the soft, mossy ground, it felt like I had stepped into a fantasy world. The area was full of twisted fir trees covered in thick moss. Roots as thick as my arm snaked across the forest floor, hiding old paths. This part of the woods seemed like it hadn't changed in centuries. It was like going back in time. But something was weird, it was too quiet. There were no animals making noise, and the air was still. I felt uneasy, like we shouldn't be there. I looked around carefully, but I didn't see any ghosts or trolls hiding. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I was so lost in my thoughts that I jumped when I heard Will's voice. "Hey! Check this out," he called. I spun around and followed his voice. I crawled under fallen trees and walked over rough ground until I finally saw Will. He was smiling and pointing at something. There, hidden behind branches and bushes, was the entrance to a cave at the bottom of the hill. I walked closer to my friend, staring at the dark opening. It looked like a big mouth, with no end in sight. Will looked at me as I got closer. "Do you think the ogre is in there?" he asked. It was too dark to see inside. Maybe he was right. Maybe something was living in there. But it didn't make sense. We'd been at Blood Hill for a while, and we hadn't seen anything strange yet. It was time to be brave. "We could go check it out," I said. I must have impressed Will because when I turned to look at him, he was holding out a flashlight. I took it from him, and then he got out his own flashlight. "I've been waiting for your balls to drop," Will said with a smirk. "Lead the way." But when it came time to actually go, we both hesitated. The sky was getting dark, and even though we had flashlights, we didn't want to go too far. We decided to just take a quick look. We squared up for the challenge when we heard a sound that made us freeze. Someone or something was coming towards us. My bravery disappeared, and I stayed frozen until Will grabbed my arm and pulled me into some bushes to hide. We lay flat, waiting to see what would happen next. It sounded like someone walking on two legs. We stayed quiet as the person got closer, then stopped somewhere near us in the cave. Me and Will looked at each other, confused. The person didn't move or make a sound. I was fine just waiting for them to leave, but Will wanted to peek. "It's just some old guy," he whispered. "Okay?" I whispered back. "What's he doing?" "Not much. He's just standing there. Take a look for yourself." I hesitated but ended up peeking out too. I saw an old, skinny man, maybe 70 or 80 years old, wearing a worn-out corduroy suit. His hair and beard were long and white. His eyes looked empty, like he didn't know anyone else was there. I hadn't seen him before, and I was pretty sure Will hadn't either. He looked lost. I was about to suggest we say something when the man suddenly started talking to himself. "Need to make whole," the old man muttered, his voice strained and gravelly. He kept saying it over and over again. Suddenly, he started walking towards us. He came so close that we could smell him, like old pee mixed with strong alcohol. Luckily, he turned and went into the cave. We didn't know what was going on, but we didn't dare move. We waited until he came back out with a shovel. He started digging around the cave and along the trees. Then he went back inside, and when he came out again, he didn't have the shovel. He disappeared into the trees where he came from. We stayed put for another 10 minutes just to be safe before we decided it was okay to come out. By then, it was dark, so we turned on our flashlights. Even with the light, the woods looked different at night. Will started looking where the old man had been digging, and I did too. There were small holes everywhere, but they didn't seem to be for any reason. They weren't deep, but it was still strange. After a while, Will spoke up. "I wonder what he was looking for," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "And what did he mean by need to make whole?" "I don't know, but it's creepy," Will said. We both stood there in silence, looking at the holes in the dark cave entrance. It felt like it was calling to us, inviting us inside. I just wanted to go home, even if it meant getting grounded for being out so late. But Will seemed like he was under a spell, drawn to the cave. Then, he said something that sent a shiver down my spine. "We can't leave without taking a quick look," Will insisted. But I started to protest, but he interrupted me. "Come on, Connor. What's a few more minutes gonna hurt? My dad's probably mad already. Let's just check it out quick and then go, okay?" I didn't have much choice. I definitely didn't want to try to find my way back alone. So, I followed Will into the dark cave. Right inside the entrance, the shovel leaned against the wall, its blade covered in mud. The cave wasn't very big, but it was big enough for us to stand up straight. It was just one room. In the light of our flashlights, we saw something on the floor, a beat-up duffel bag. I shined my light to the right and saw a sleeping bag and a pillow. On top of the sleeping bag was a plastic bag that smelled like alcohol, probably belonging to the old guy. I pulled my shirt up over my nose to block the smell while I looked around, while we went through the bag. The walls were rough and uneven, with no plants growing on them. The air smelled musty, like booze and animal droppings. "Do you think he actually lives here?" I asked, looking at a small stalagmite. "Maybe," Will said, still searching through the bag. "But I think he's probably the ogre our parents warned us about. He might be one of those old war veterans. Remember Uncle Greg?" I didn't remember, but I didn't say anything. Will kept talking. "Anyway, my point is, it's all nonsense. Ghosts, ogres, come on, none of that stuff is real." "Okay, sure," I said, turning to face him. "But why?" He shrugged, still digging through the bag. "Adults are weird. But forget that, look what I found." I kept my eyes on the entrance, just in case the old man came back. Luckily, We were still alone, but he could be out there somewhere, watching us. I cautiously squatted down next to Will to see what he found. It was a worn, brown leather wallet. The bag was full of dirty clothes. Will opened the wallet, revealing a faded receipt and some loose change. Nothing too interesting. But then a photo fell out. I picked it up to get a closer look. It was discolored and showed a young woman. She looked like she was from the flower power era. Her hair was dark and curly, and her eyes were bright green. She smiled at the camera, and for a moment, it felt like she was smiling at me. She was really pretty. I decided to keep my thoughts to myself and turned to Will, ready to give him the photo. That's when I saw the expression on his face. Will's attention shifted away from the duffel bag in the photo, focusing instead on something deeper inside the cave. His whole demeanor seemed different, like something was really bothering him. His face looked pale, like he had seen a ghost. Then, out of nowhere, he stood up and started pushing me towards the entrance without saying a word. I didn't argue. We made our way outside, and I noticed Will kept looking back over his shoulder. I tried asking him what was wrong, but he just told me to keep moving. I glanced into the shadows but saw nothing. It was strange to see Will acting so serious. Usually, he was a chatterbox. His behavior made me feel uneasy. Once we were away from the cave, Will seemed to calm down. But whenever I tried to talk about what we found, he changed the subject. It was like he didn't want to think about it. When we got home hours later, Will's dad scolded us for being out so late. He didn't call the police, though part of me wished he had. After the lecture, we were sent straight to bed. Will stayed quiet the whole time, which surprised me. Usually, he'd crack jokes after his dad left. But he stayed silent, slipping into bed. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I was afraid of getting yelled at if Will's dad saw us still awake. It took me a while to relax after everything that happened, especially feeling bad for worrying Will's dad. And my friend had been acting strange since we got back. Eventually, I fell asleep and slept most of the night. But I think I might have heard something at one point. I'm still not sure if it was a dream or real, but I think I heard Will crying. The next morning, my parents picked me up. They knew I messed up, but they didn't scold me anymore. They could see I was tired and upset. Will was still asleep when I left, so I didn't get to talk to him until a week later. We never talked about Blood Hill, the old man, or what scared him. Life went on. Seasons changed, and things went back to normal with their ups and downs. After we graduated, we both left our hometown. Will studied journalism in Florida, and I went to Massachusetts for engineering. Even though we were far apart, we stayed in touch and met up whenever we could. Things were busy but good. Will got a job as a journalist at the Orlando Sentinel, and I started my own company. Our days of wild adventures as kids were over for 20 years. Then, 2 days ago, out of the blue, Will brought up Blood Hill for the first time in forever. When Will called, I didn't think much of it. We usually talked once a week, just to catch up. But this time, something seemed off. "Hey, Will, is everything okay?" I asked. I found something," he said, sounding uneasy. "What is it?" "I'll send it to your email," he replied. A few minutes later, I got his email and opened it. Inside was an old newspaper article. The headline caught my eye right away. It was about Blood Hill, our old haunt. Seeing that name made me feel uneasy. I read it. I told Will. "What's going on?" But he didn't say anything. He just stayed silent on the other end of the line. Will had a habit of sending me creepy stuff, but this felt different. It felt personal. The article was from 1967 and told a scary story about two campers who found something terrible in the woods near my hometown. I felt a shiver go down my spine as I read on. The campers stumbled upon a cave on a hill, and inside, they found a young woman's body. She had been hurt and killed in a horrible way. I felt sick to my stomach and had to stop reading for a moment. It was like the room was closing in on me. I managed to ask, "Are you saying this happened at Blood Hill?" "Yeah," Will replied, sounding relieved to finally talk about it. Then, he dropped another bombshell. "No one caught the person who did it," he said sadly. "But keep reading. It gets even weirder." I took a deep breath and kept reading. Further down was a picture of a man. He looked younger, but I recognized him. It was the old man we saw at the cave, the ogre. His name was Wilbur Burke, and he was determined to find the person who hurt the woman. The article ended with a photo of the woman from the duffel bag we found. "Her name was Emily," I said softly, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Suzanne Burke," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. After I spoke her name, Will took a deep breath on the other end of the line. "Yeah, you finished reading," he said quietly. "I found out some more stuff too." The newspaper article had left out a big detail: the person who hurt Suzanne had taken her head with them. It was never found. At first, people thought it was an animal attack, but the doctors said her head was cut off with a saw. I felt scared and sick to my stomach as Will kept talking. The day before he called me, Will asked his dad about Wilbur Burke. We'd never seen him before, except that one time. Will's dad finally told him that after Suzanne died, Wilbur changed a lot. He looked really bad, like a ghost, and started drinking a lot. His house and property got messy too. After Suzanne's death, her dad, Wilbur, changed a lot. He didn't talk to people much and seemed lost in his own world. Some said he acted more like an animal than a person. Eventually, he left his home and lived in the woods. He never hurt anyone, but people in town were scared of him. Adults saw him as a reminder of what could happen if they lost a child. Kids like us thought he was a scary part of the Blood Hill stories. But things took a big turn 5 years ago. A hiker who didn't know about Blood Hill found Wilbur hanging from a tree. Nearby were holes in the ground, maybe 20 of them. Nobody knew what they were for, but I think Will's dad, Hank, knows more than he's telling. He knew what Wilbur was looking for, the thing the police couldn't find. When Will told me about it, he said something even scarier. He saw Suzanne's ghost in that cave we went to. He didn't tell me before, but he saw her, headless, coming toward him. I'm not sure which is worse, seeing a ghost or knowing that nobody's looking for what could make Suzanne whole again.